A man quietly sneaked up behind the Whisperers just as he was about to make his move. The Whisperers' companions emerged from the cave, holding a gun. Daryl had to hide in a ditch to assess the situation and prepare for another opportunity. But what Daryl didn't expect was that Alpha was also here, and she had brought along a dozen or so zombies, apparently preparing to go outside. Daryl had initially wanted to enter the cave to see if Connie was still alive, but given the current situation, even if Connie was alive, she had likely been captured. So, Daryl decided to quietly follow Alpha. Alpha led the group of zombies along a stream, originally intending to scout the area. However, as they continued, she began to feel increasingly uneasy, sensing that someone was watching them. Suddenly, Alpha looked around vigilantly, trying to find out where the sneak attacker was, but she didn't find anything when she scanned around. Alpha had no choice but to retreat with her followers, her eyes fixed on the woods on the opposite bank. Daryl charged from behind and took down one of the Whisperers, then kicked Alpha's gun out of her hand. Daryl is slashed twice by the Whisperers, not fatally, but his eyes are soaked with blood and his vision is impaired. He picked up the trunk on the ground and flung it behind him, just in time to hit the Alpha, who was about to come sneaking up on him. However, at this moment, the horde of zombies arrived, forcing Daryl to deal with them first. This gave Alpha an opportunity to strike. As Daryl fought off the zombies with all his strength, Alpha rushed in and stabbed a knife into Daryl's thigh. Daryl, in excruciating pain, dropped to his knees. He looked into the distance and saw Alpha picking up the dropped gun. Daryl decides to get out of here. He's going to die if he stays. 5 minutes later, Alpha followed the blood trail and reached a gas station. Despite her severe injuries, the man was in no better condition, and Alpha still had the gun. Indeed, Daryl was hiding inside, and now even standing up was a challenge. Hearing someone outside, he quickly grabbed a tool from the table to use as a weapon. Alpha entered the room, surveying it, initially planning to find the person and end them with a gunshot. However, at that moment, a dizzy spell overcame her, likely due to excessive blood loss. Alpha then used the gun barrel to knock against the doorframe, immediately attracting a few zombies. 3 minutes later, the zombies walked into the house. They merely glanced at the Alpha and headed inside. Daryl cursed the crazy woman when he saw this. He kicked the cabinet vigorously, eventually causing the fire extinguisher on top to fall. Only one zombie remained, and Daryl had no weapons left in his hands. As the zombie pounced, he could only defend himself with his legs. In a moment of desperation, Daryl saw the dagger on his left leg. While he managed to dispatch the zombie, removing the knife caused a gush of blood from his leg. If he doesn't stop the bleeding, today will be the day of his death. Now Daryl and Alpha were both seriously injured, and it was a matter of who could hold out the longest. By nightfall, Alpha was completely drained of strength. She could barely manage to remove her mask, realizing that she might not make it through the night. Daryl, driven solely by sheer willpower, was hanging on. The last time he suffered such severe injuries was when he was on the road searching for Sophia. Alpha was nearing her end, and she even began to hallucinate, seeing her former enemies standing in front of her, forming a line. In a feeble voice, she muttered, "Thank you." The pain she had endured had made her stronger, and it had also made Lydia stronger. Alpha fights off his injuries and tries to get up, but immediately spits out a mouthful of blood as she does so. The last thing she could accept was being told she didn't love her daughter. She struggled to get up and tried to deal with the man who had spoken out of turn. Daryl, at this point, was too weak to intervene. But as Alpha took a few shaky steps, she collapsed to the ground, even the weight of a gun becoming too much to bear. Both of them could now see each other, but were powerless to do anything. At that moment, Alpha's vision blurred, and she saw a figure before her. Unmistakably Lydia, her beloved daughter, had come. Alpha spoke with desperation, pulling a knife from her waist, wanting her daughter to end her suffering. The Whisperers have a rule that whoever kills an Alpha is the new Alpha. Lydia believes that her mother never thought of her as a daughter, just a tool to be used. The next morning, Alpha woke up still alive. Although her wounds throbbed with pain, she managed to rise to her feet. However, the greater pain was now in her heart, as her daughter's actions from the previous night had left her feeling cold and betrayed. The handgun had been taken, but the knife remained on the table with a message left behind. Seeing it, Alpha could only describe her feelings as a mixture of sorrow and frustration. She had believed that everything she had done was for her daughter's sake, to make Lydia stronger. But her thoughts are just her thoughts. After a while, Beta managed to track down Alpha. This time, Alpha was resolute. She was determined to make those wretched people pay by using the horde of zombies. Her daughter's choice would only make her stronger and more ruthless. Daryl, in the meantime, had a sudden awakening. Lydia had been living outside for these few days, observing the Whisperers and the people from the community. She had been torn between deciding which side to stand with. Ultimately, she had chosen to side with the regular people. By a riverbank, Carol sat in reflection, realizing that her actions had been utterly selfish these past few days. Not only had she harmed Connie and the others, but she had also hurt her best friend Daryl. She felt too ashamed to return, until Ezekiel found this place. Inside the hilltop, Earl and Alden, with Eugene's help, successfully developed a catapult. If there was a zombie horde attack, it would certainly come in handy. At this moment, they spotted a horse-drawn carriage approaching in the distance. It was the people from Alexandria's safe zone. Although they had received messages over the radio, the presence of a stranger on the carriage raised questions. Earl asked Aaron who this woman was and why he had never seen her before. Aaron said with some embarrassment, "That's Mary. She escaped from the Whisperers and helped us. Your son Adam is Mary's nephew and she wants to meet her." Earl's attitude was also very firm. He wasn't afraid that someone else would take the child, but he was disgusted with these people who discarded the child at will. Alden looked at Earl and tried to calm him down. Earl is also a kind of tacit acceptance, but she can only look at the child from a distance and can't touch him. Meanwhile, Yumiko and her group were preparing to leave. Originally, they were a team of 5. Now, with Connie and Magna trapped in the cave, they had to search for them, hoping they were still alive. Just as they were about to depart, Daryl returned on his motorcycle, bringing Lydia with him. The hilltop immediately convened a meeting. Lydia urgently stated, "My mother won't give up. She'll lead the remaining horde of zombies to crush the 3 major communities." The hilltop happened to be in their marching path, so they needed to evacuate as soon as possible. Opinions were diverse, with most favoring evacuation and finding a new place to rebuild. However, Earl vehemently opposed, asking, "How many times have you ventured out? Have you ever found a place as good as the hilltop? We must stay and fight. Even if we die, it should be for a meaningful place." Aaron added, "We can die here, but what about my daughter? What about the children in the community? What will happen to them?" Earl fell silent at this. Finally, Daryl proposed that they send the children away first, and that everyone else gather supplies and head to Oceanside. They would reunite there. Today, the Alpha will lead the clan and the zombie horde to wipe out the human community. The hilltop had anticipated this, and facing thousands of zombies, they knew they had no chance. They decided to gather the children and take them to a safe place, while the rest of them packed up their supplies and headed for Oceanside to meet up. They're on their way. As long as these children are safe, the adults can fight without any worries. However, as they had walked several kilometers, a massive tree blocked their path, and above them hung the lifeless bodies of a man and a woman. There was no doubt that this was the work of the Whisperers. Daryl suspected that the other potential routes would likely have the same situation. Lydia, on the carriage, was also feeling downhearted. The 2 deceased individuals were members of the hilltop sent out to scout, now hanging lifelessly from the tree. Daryl sighed in resignation, saying, "Let's go back. It's definitely Negan's doing. I think they've blocked all the way out." They had no choice but to turn back and bring their comrades' bodies back for a proper burial. Upon hearing this news, the group's expressions turned grim, their brows furrowed in concern. The Whisperers had effectively blocked their escape routes, and even if they requested help from Alexandria's safe zone and Oceanside, it would take time for reinforcements to arrive. Now they're on their own. The atmosphere was somber until Earl's voice rang out, igniting their determination. Soon, everyone began preparations. Meanwhile, Rosita arrived at the radio room, and she was missing Eugene a little. However, to her surprise, the room was empty. She didn't know where he had gone. Then, a woman's voice came through the radio. After she left, a flustered Eugene realized the gravity of the situation. He and Juanita had agreed that their communications should be strictly between them. Now, no matter how he apologized, there was no response from the other end. Frustrated, Eugene had to go out to organize the power source. The zombie horde is coming. It's his first line of defense. Rosita, feeling guilty for ruining things for Eugene, came to comfort him. Her life hadn't been going well lately. Eugene had distanced himself from her. Siddiq had died, and Gabriel was often busy with his duties, leaving her feeling somewhat neglected. She remembers Eugene's company, but from what we've seen so far, Eugene seems to have developed feelings for another person, and the girl has developed feelings for him. Eugene's mind suddenly went blank. Had he misheard that? He couldn't believe it. He turned to look at Rosita. The once unattainable goddess, the woman he had pined for, without hope of ever touching, was now offering him a chance to kiss her. Eugene took slow, hesitant steps toward her, carefully closing the distance between them. Instead of joy, he felt a sense of unease. Rosita watched him with a faint smile, and Eugene stopped just a centimeter away from her. This was a chapter of his life that had passed. In the past, he might have gone crazy with happiness, but now, all he could think about was Juanita. Rosita smiled to ease the awkwardness of the situation, and in that moment she saw Eugene in a new light. Is this a reflection of reality? Eugene used to be so childish and weak in Rosita's eyes that she wouldn't even think about him. And now Eugene seems mature and charming. It was just that he no longer loved her. Of course, they are still good friends. In the open space, at the entrance of the hilltop, everyone was busy setting up obstacles to slow down the approaching zombie horde. Yumiko reassured Kelly not to worry, believing that his sister will survive. Just then, they noticed some rats coming out of the woods. The zombie swarm is coming soon. Everyone's heart is heavy. Eugene, fully suited in armor, sat despondently by the radio, but Juanita remained unresponsive. He prepared to sing one last song for Juanita before heading into battle. And so were the others. Jerry looked at his two children with reluctance in his eyes. Earl even left the baby in Alden's care, afraid that he wouldn't survive. Rosita brandished her weapon, trying to recapture the feeling of fighting in the past. Ezekiel let go of his preconceived notions and came to Lydia with a suit of armor. Judith was well aware of the gravity of the situation and continuously called out for her mother on the walkie-talkie. Unfortunately, for all these days, there had been no response from Mycone. Soon, everyone was prepared for battle and began to step outside. Eugene's song was over, and the radio was still silent. Just when he thought he was going to have to fight with regret, a beautiful song came from inside. Juanita responded in the same manner, singing her reply. Eugene smiled with relief, feeling that even if he died on the battlefield, he would have no regrets. He first apologized for what had happened before, and then talked about the situation the community was about to face. There was a possibility that they wouldn't be able to contact each other anymore. Juanita fell silent briefly and then swiftly provided a series of addresses, setting a rendezvous for. A week later, Eugene froze. Daryl walked down the stairs, sorry to see the tumor on Ezekiel's neck. They'd had a bit of a falling out over Carol, but that didn't matter now. And they make a pact with each other to get the baby out of there if anyone is still alive. Daryl then sought out Judith. Finally, he cautioned her that if Ezekiel came looking for her and RJ during the battle, she should go with him, regardless of whether she knew his whereabouts. He asked her to promise him. Lastly, Daryl visited the graveyard to pay his respects to the fallen comrades, including his dear friend Glenn. That's when Carol arrived. She owed Daryl an apology. Daryl remained silent for a few moments before turning to face her. Daryl had always been Carol's protector, no matter the circumstances. Their friendship had spanned a decade and had evolved beyond mere friendship. As the sky darkened, Daryl picked up a weapon from the table and headed towards the front gate. By now, everyone was in formation, waiting for the zombie to arrive. This will be a fight to the death. How many will survive? If you like my videos, please must like and subscribe my channel.